We are up to way number 38 of the 48 ways to wisdom. This is chapter 6, Mishnah number 6 of Pirkei Avos. These are the 48 ways to achieve the Almighty's Torah. And way number 38 is Noseh be'ol im chavero. The way to get Torah, the way to achieve wisdom, is to lift the burden with your fellow, to bear your fellow's burden. Now, what does this mean? That's question number 1. Question number 2, why would this be a way to achieve Torah? So, of course, when you bear the burden with your fellow, it means to empathize with others. Someone else is going through a difficult time. Someone else is in pain. Someone else is suffering. And they're bearing their burden. And typically, they're bearing the burden alone. Only they feel their pain. Only they are suffering in their plight. But others can bear the burden alongside them and empathize with them and feel what they're going through and suffer alongside them. That is this idea of Noseh be'ol, to lift in the burden together with your fellow. And we all know that when you go through a difficult challenge, when you're suffering, when you're in a difficult patch in life, one of the worst parts of it is a sensation that you and you alone are going through this. Everyone else is living their life and they're blissfully unaware of whatever difficulty, whatever challenge, or God forbid, tragedy that you are experiencing. And just the knowledge that there's someone else who's thinking about you, who's caring about you, who's suffering alongside you, who's interrupting their life to spend time and brain share to think about you, that offers a modicum of comfort. And this is what we're told here to do. You want Torah? Bear the burden with others. When someone's going through a difficult time, think about it. Think about what they're going through. Think about what it's like. Try to feel their pain. Now, this could refer to physical pain, but really it could be anything. Spiritual pain, emotional pain, financial challenges. You think about your friends that were laid off or are between jobs. People have all sorts of difficulties, social difficulties, educational difficulties, family discord, problems with their children, problems at work, whatever it is. Try to get a sense of what they're going through. Just this week in our community, there was an event launching a new organization, a new branch really, of an organization that helps couples dealing with infertility. And this is one of those things that, if you're not dealing with it, if you're not experiencing with it, you have no familiarity or no firsthand familiarity with this notion. There's a high percentage of people that want children, and maybe even desperately, and they're not able to. And they have to, hope and try and pray, of course, but there's a whole slew of different treatments that they can undergo, and IVF and all that, to try to have children. And in a community like ours, it's very much centered around children. The schools and the parks and Shabbos afternoon and so on. And there are some couples in our community that are dealing with infertility. And there's an organization I think it's headquartered in New York, that they have branches all over the country and the world. And they help couples dealing with infertility. They provide knowledge and guidance and help, financial help towards paying for these very expensive treatments. So they had a launch event, and one of the people who spearheaded it, he was talking about what it's like. And it was kind of heart-wrenching to hear about how, everyone has just children, seem like they have children easily, and they have a lively, robust home, and it's just a wonderful thing for them. And then you have other couples that, every month they're just hoping and they're trying this and trying that. And their house is barren. And it's an example of something where you're not going through it. It's just not in your mind. You're so busy with your own life. It takes a special person to think about other people and to think about the various and manifold different challenges that they may be going through. So some people have that problem. Some people have financial problems. Some people have car troubles, and some people have social difficulties. God forbid their marriage is not on steady grounds. Everyone has something they're going through. And the mark of the greats is to always be thinking of other people and always trying to help them, and even if you can help them, to feel their pain, to empathize with them. Now, the first person that we are responsible to do this with, of course, is our spouse. It's almost like the definition of marriage. It's to share your life with someone else. And that means not just to share the highs and the accomplishments and the successes, but also the lows. When a person's by themselves, they're by themselves. And it's not good for man to be alone. And now you get married, and there's another person in your life, and your job now is to share your life together. And when they're going through a difficult time, your job is to bear the burden with them. That's the key to be a good spouse. And of course, it's not easy. It's hard work. After all, you're different people. And you don't viscerally feel, at least not by default, you don't viscerally feel what they're going through. You're different, and you're very different because you're different species. So it's hard work. Our own little pains, our own little challenges, any frustration that we have in our life, that right away dominates and occupies our mind. But when someone else, they're suffering, that's not so important in our eyes. And we're able to be objective. With someone else's pain, we could show objectivity. It's manageable. Come on, you'll survive. It's not the end of the world. In the grand scheme of things, it's no big deal, if you think about it. That's how we think by default with other people's difficulties. And it's work to overcome that and to train ourselves to be someone who empathizes with others and cares about others and validates their pain and doesn't disregard it and doesn't try to put it in perspective. That's this quality of bearing the burden with another and suffering alongside them. And what's amazing about it is that in a few different places we're told that this is the attribute that the Almighty reveals to us. When Moshe first meets God, has an audience with God, has prophecy, it's in the burning bush. Chapter 3 of the book of Exodus. And Rashi asks a fascinating question. Why is the presence of God, so to speak, why is that in a burning bush? Maybe it should be a burning tree or something more impressive than a little bush. And Rashi tells us, based upon the earlier sources, it's because God is with us in our pain. If the nation is in slavery and they're being oppressed and mistreated, the presence of God, so to speak, is not going to be in a comfortable place, so to speak. It's going to be in a lowly bush. The Almighty will be with the nation in their suffering. Similarly, at Sinai, in chapter 24 of Exodus, there's a very striking description of what the people saw, what vision of God they saw. And under God, so to speak, they saw brickwork. And the commentaries, the Talmud tells us that this is to indicate that God's trying to show them when you were dealing, so to speak, with your challenges and your enslavement and your oppression and your forced labor of making bricks in Egypt, God, so to speak, there was some sort of brickwork, so to speak, before him because he was, so to speak, as it were, going through what you were going through as well. So at Sinai, at the moment, at the time of the giving of the Torah, the attribute that the Almighty revealed to the nation is one of empathy. Now, there are many sources that talk about this, but I want to cite one more from the Talmud. The Talmud's talking about a criminal, and not just any criminal, a criminal who was found guilty of capital crime. That's like the worst of the worst. Not only did they do a horrific crime, but the testimony stood up in court and they're going to be executed. And the Talmud says, what's God, so to speak? Like, what's his reaction to this? And the Talmud talks about how God is suffering, so to speak, with the criminal who is being executed. Now, we would say, if it's this criminal, this is a bad guy, let's get rid of them. We should celebrate. But the Talmud says, no, God doesn't celebrate. God's suffering with them. And of course, the Talmud says, well, if God's suffering, so to speak, with the death of the criminal, imagine what he feels, so to speak, with the suffering of the righteous. But again, in a few different places, we're told that this is the quality of the Almighty. This is an attribute that he reveals to us repeatedly. And it's one that we ought to emulate. And there are many mitzvos that are all about this. For example, visiting the sick. Bikur cholim. Why do you visit the sick? What are you supposed to do when you visit the sick? What you're supposed to do is to empathize with them and feel their pain. Comforting the mourners. Why do we do that? Why do we go to the Shiva house? They're going through pain. We're going to come to their home and we're going to suffer with them. That's the essence of comforting the mourners. There's a prayer that we say after Shabbos. It's a very unusual prayer. It's really a chapter in Psalms. But we say it specifically after Shabbos because we're told in the sources at the time of the conclusion of Shabbos, there's a shuffling that happens in heaven. The poor souls that have been condemned to go to Gehenna, they have a reprieve on Shabbos. And then when Shabbos is over, they got to go back to Gehenna. It's very unpleasant. And we say this prayer, and the theme of the prayer is all about trying to help those who are going through difficult times. But we're doing it to extend Shabbos a little bit, and thus to forestall a little bit the return of those poor chaps to Gehenna. And the commentaries tell us that this is about the fact that, we're here, we're not suffering, at least not in the way that they are. And we're supposed to think a little bit about them and try to do whatever we can to lessen their pain and experience, or to think at least about what they're going through. And this is not easy to do at all. Because again, by default, we're so self-centered. We don't actually physically feel someone else's pain unless we're on a very, very lofty level. It's a very lofty level to do that. The Chafetz Chaim, during the whole World War I, he refused to sleep on a bed. For 4 years, he slept on the floor. Why? How could I sleep luxuriously on a bed? This was not like a Posturpedic bed, I guarantee you. But still, how can I sleep on a bed when there are Jews suffering? When my brothers and sisters all over Europe are suffering. I'm going to suffer with them. Now, those people don't even know that the Chafetz Chaim is sleeping on the floor. But still, it's an instinct. You feel their pain and what they're going through, and you have to make sure that you reflect that in your life. But that's a level for the Chafetz Chaim. When we deal with someone else suffering, we always try to think, how do I get out of this as fast as possible? Oh, I'm so sorry for your loss. Oh, I feel your pain. That's important. But there's a big difference between that, something that could be like a platitude, versus actually bearing their burden, which means to enter their universe and to really try to simulate in your mind what they're going through. That's your job when you go to comfort the mourner who lost a relative. But the mourner themselves, they have the same job. Their job is to feel the pain of the departed and think about what they're going through. Think about the trauma and the seriousness of the experience of the soul of the person who has just deceased. And that's why the laws of the mourner very much reflect what the relative of theirs is undergoing at that time in heaven, which is why there's this separate class of laws until the burial, and then the first 3 days, and the first 7 days, the first 30 days, the first 11 months, the first 12 months. These are different junctures, so to speak, in the post-mortem experience of the soul of their relative in heaven, and therefore they're going to do things, they're going to take steps to feel, so to speak, what the relative of theirs is undergoing in heaven. So this is all about breaking out of our selfishness. And by the way, there's a flip side to it as well. If you really care about your fellow and you suffer, when they are suffering, what about when they're happy? What about when they're successful? What about when they're just crushing it? So sometimes we have an instinct to kind of hope that they fail. They just have everything going for them. There's like a perverse instinct to tear it all down. If someone else is really sick, one of your classmates or one of your chevra, one of your group, they're just making a ton of money and they're just doing well. Everything's just seemingly just absolutely going swimmingly for them. We kind of may have this perverse instinct to say, let's put them in place a little bit. So it takes work to be happy for them, to be genuinely happy for their success, and to celebrate with them, and to be delighted that they're flourishing. There's a story I want to tell you of my great-grandfather, Rabbi Avraham Grudzinski, who was sadly killed in the Holocaust, but was the head of the great yeshiva in Slobodka, which was like the greatest yeshiva in the world. One of the most impressive figures in the pre-war yeshiva world. So he was from Warsaw, but he lived in Lithuania. But he once went to visit his family in Warsaw, and they're sitting there with the family, and the great rabbi who's visiting from Lithuania starts singing, and then gets up and starts dancing by himself, which is odd. And they asked him what's going on. He says, well, right now, one of my students back in Lithuania, they're getting married. And I'm here. I can't be there with them, but I want to celebrate with them. So I'm far away, but I want to feel their joy with them. I want to celebrate with them. That's the flip side of bearing the burden, rejoicing in their joy. I want to tell you something very cool about this. This is an insight that comes courtesy of Rabbi Chaim Shmulevitz. It's one of the great Rosh Hashivas of the 20th century. He noted that the term that's used over here is to bear the burden. So someone's carrying the burden, you're going to go and carry it with them. What happens when you bear the burden of your fellow? What happens to their burden? Well, of course, it gets lightened. It gets lessened. So Rabbi Shmulevitz deduced from this use of term that suppose the person who's suffering is unaware of the fact that I'm empathizing with them. The people, the Jews across Europe are unaware of the fact that the Chafetz Chaim is on the floor, suffering with them. Does it impact them at all or not? So he said that, well, if I'm bearing their burden, I could be far away from them. And they could be unaware of the fact that I'm bearing their burden alongside them. But their load will be lightened, even if they're not aware of this other person empathizing with them. If you bear their burden, they're not aware of it. But it's going to lighten their load, even if they're not aware of it. That was his insight. And by the way, he was someone who exemplified this. There are many stories about this great Rabbi Shmuel Levitz. His wife used to edit the paper. They got the paper every morning. And she would cut out any distressing stories. Because otherwise he would just start crying and sobbing the whole day. And I heard testimony from someone who would witness this. They heard the great rabbi sobbing and sobbing and sobbing and sobbing. Uncontrollably. And his wife said, I didn't, he got to the paper before I did, and he read about a fallen soldier in Israel. So he couldn't stop crying. That's an example of someone who's living and feeling other people's pain in a visceral fashion. And think about the hostages currently being held in hellish conditions in Gaza. It's like frightening to even think about what they're undergoing. We want to avoid it. And of course, we want them back. It's very important to get them back. The quality of the greats is to think about, maybe not all the time, because too much, I guess, could be damaging to yourself, but a little bit to think about what they're going through and what their family's going through, the uncertainty. Just yesterday, we had, of course, the very dramatic rescue operation. Now, if you listen to this in the podcast, it's going to be released like in a few weeks. So we're talking here on June 9th. So after Shabbos, I opened up my phone. Wow, they rescued 4 hostages. What an incredible operation. Apparently it happened hours and hours and hours and hours earlier. But that's one of the things that benefits or drawbacks of keeping Shabbos is that you don't find any news till after Shabbos. And you think about that. These people, they woke up in the morning, 250 days into their captivity. And when they go to sleep that night, they're back with their family. It's an unbelievable thing. How joyous it is. Oh, I was thinking that this is emblematic of what we're told about the Messiah. It's going to be so out of the blue. If you want an example, you imagine, God forbid, right? You're being held by Hamas, and there's war all around you, and there's armed terrorists surrounding you. And you don't know if you're going to live it through the day, and it's day after day after day after day, and then suddenly, boom, you're out, and you're within minutes you're back in Israel, you're back home, back with your family, you're free. Our sages do tell us, and the sources tell us that that's an example of the transformation of Messiah. It's just out of the blue. It's out of the blue and it's instant. But what about everyone else who's still there? What are they going through? Some of them are being kept underground for hundreds of days. Can you imagine what that's like? This quality is to try to think about it and to try to empathize with it and try to bear the burden. And if someone does this, we're told, way number 38, that's a way to get Torah. Now, why would this be a way to get Torah? what does this have to do at all with the pursuit of Torah? It's a good question. But the answer is obvious. We have a precedent for this. The first qualities that we are told about Moshe, who got more Torah than anyone else, Moshe is the conduit of Torah, the ultimate receptacle of Torah. What are we told about him? The very first thing we told about him as an adult, he goes out and suffers with his fellow brethren. Vayar b'savlosam. The first thing we're told, he goes out. He was a prince. He didn't have to go out. He goes out and witnesses the suffering of his fellow. And he sees a brother of his being hit, and he right away intervenes and kills the guy. He doesn't sit silently. He bears the burden with his fellow. So much so that he has to flee Egypt. And he goes to Midian, and he goes to the well, and he sees the daughters of Jethro being harassed, and again he intervenes. Again, he doesn't allow that to go on, to proceed. He's not someone that allows someone else's suffering to endure. And we're told, like the biography of Moshe, 3 stories in quick succession, one after another, and it's all about him witnessing suffering alongside his brethren. And the Midrash gives us some more examples of what he would do. Vayar b'savlosam, he witnessed their pain. The Midrash talks about how Moshe would go and help every slave that he could carry and produce bricks. And even though that's not really going to make much of an impact on the plight of a nation of millions of slaves, it doesn't matter. Moshe is bearing the burden with them. And the Midrash concludes, and I cited this Midrash in my book, on the chapters on Moshe. The Midrash concludes that this is why Moshe got Torah. Moshe, you were a prince. You were in the ivory tower. You could have stayed there, lived a life of luxury. But no, you said, I'm a prince. I don't care. I'm going to go to the lowliest of classes, and I'm going to identify with them. I'm going to leave the high points and go to the low points. I'm going to leave the luxury. And I'm going to go lower myself to my brethren. Moshe descended from his rank and lowered himself to help the less fortunate. God says, I will do the same. I will lower myself, so to speak, from the heavens and talk to you. If you view Torah as simply a cognitive pursuit like any other, bearing the burden with your fellow, empathizing with them, feeling their pain, thinking about what they're going through, that should offer you no advantage. But if we realize that the Torah, it's the knowledge of God, and to be a worthy receptacle of Torah means to be deserving of a gift from the Almighty God. What are his criteria for giving that gift? One of them is someone who cares for others is a worthy receptacle. If you want God to, so to speak, lower himself to you, the way to do that is to lower yourself to others. Think about what they're going through. Think about their plight. Bear their burden. This is way number 38 to receive Torah. May we all be so fortunate to grow as people and to break out of the little cocoon of selfishness that we are in by default, caring about others, thinking about others, noticing others, experiencing their pain on some level, being happy for their successes, and that will make us worthy of the Almighty responding in kind to us and will open up for us portals of divine wisdom. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.